Welcome to Behind the Muscle podcast. Today's guest is an IFBB Pro Classic Physique and the 2021 Mr. Canada Classic Physique. Today's guest is Blake Course. Blake, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Quentin.
For sure, Blake. So we're going to jump right into a couple of questions. I like to start all my podcasts with. The first question I have for you is, who are a few of your favorite bodybuilders of all time?
So it's funny, I was watching a couple of your podcasts earlier and I knew this question was coming. So I had a little bit of time to prepare, thankfully. But honestly, it's like, this is a tough one. I think what started me off was my dad was, into fitness and into all the kind of old school bodybuilders. So I started out by watching Pumping Iron, like many people did, I imagine, that are my age. So Arnold was a huge kind of influence at the beginning, and then got introduced to bodybuilding.com. And I read like every single article I think that they put out on that website. So I saw, Jay Cutler was on there. They did a lot of features with him and Muscle Tech. And Muscle Tech's actually like a local company. So, we got influenced a lot through anybody that they picked up. And back then, like when I was younger coming up, they had like everyone. And then they kind of transitioned to having like Phil Heath as like their mainstay. So always been a big fan of Phil Heath. I think classic physique, it's only been around for a short amount of time. So coming up, it was always like the bodybuilding guys. So if I had to pick one, probably Arnold, but Jay Cutler, a big fan of him, big fan of what he's done in the business realm as well. It's really kind of inspiring after his bodybuilding career. And then also a big fan of Dorian Yates. I just think that he's got a really cool style and story and kind of everything like about his style of training. I'm nothing like him in terms of training and that kind of mentality, but it's another guy that I definitely look up to for sure.
Excellent, man. So you kind of brought up your dad, and as I was kind of preparing for our conversation, I saw a pretty recent post where you were actually working out, lifting, training with your dad, which I think is really cool. We're going to kind of get into that. But at what age, Blake, did you actually start lifting weights, and then kind of why? I'm assuming it probably was because of your dad, but whatever reason, just kind of share that with us if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So started training. My sister actually got a gym membership at a local gym. And there was a deal if you signed two people up. So she convinced me to come down with her and started there. My whole family kind of was training there. So they would drive me down. This is before, I even had a license. I think this would have been grade 9. So I would have been like 13, 14 years old. Started working out, got introduced to it that way. I used to see guys at the gym that like Dorian Hamilton trained there. He's a little bit older than I am. So he had like a phenomenal physique at like 18. So when I was like 14, I saw him walking around. I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive. And he would have other guys come to the gym. Like I think Frank McGrath trained there a few times when he was with Animal. And, obviously him walking around the gym is pretty cool when you're younger. So I got to see all those guys, but it wasn't for me until like later on in life that I wanted to take it competitively. So at the beginning, it was more like, I love to train and go in and have fun and stuff, but there was really no aspirations to kind of get on the stage or do any of that. But yeah, it was early on in life for sure. And I didn't start taking it more seriously until later.
Cool. And we'll definitely get there. But dude, Dorian Hamilton and Frank McGrath walking around in the first gym that you started training, like that, it doesn't get more legit than that, huh, man?
Yeah, no, it was a really cool gym. And like, I don't know, for whatever reason, like Canada is so big, but in this particular area where I am, I'm just outside of Toronto. There are so many like, great young and older bodybuilders. So even like Regan Grimes, he was only like a 45-minute drive. And I went to school out where he was. He's a little bit younger than me. And I remember seeing even him at the gym and was, it's impressive to see these guys training, and especially when you're younger too, for sure.
For sure. Yeah. No, that's kind of wild, man. Cause like, most people grow up, looking at, well, my age, we grew up looking at the magazines and stuff. And then, you've got, I mean, Frank McGrath back in the day, he was in like every single magazine. There's probably like 15 different pages of animal, advertisements with his picture and stuff. So I can't even imagine like starting off lifting weights and then like these dudes that are in the magazines are like literally like at your gym. So that's if bodybuilding didn't choose you, I don't know, man. That's pretty cool. So I wanna touch on your childhood and your upbringing a little bit more. Obviously, you're from Canada. You grew up in Canada. Kind of already alluded to that or mentioned that. But what kind of shaped your childhood? Was it sports? Were you involved in any other extracurricular type things like taekwondo? You already mentioned your sister, but just kind of talk about your family, talk about that childhood
Mhm.
up to high school, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so like kind of alluded to my dad earlier, but he was always into the gym scene and like was really serious about it kind of when he was in his mid 20s. And then he said he had me, and then everything would just went downhill with his physique. So but kind of growing up, he was like a bigger guy, and we had a bit of a home gym that he would work out at. So I got to watch him, and he never competed, but he kind of hung around in like circles where people did. So he knows about the sport, and has always been encouraging for me to kind of pursue this journey into the IFBB, and has been like a huge support and fan of kind of everything that I've been able to get to up to this point. So that's been really cool. I've had a lot of support. Like my mom, loves it too, and has comes to as many shows as she can, and watches it all and stuff. So that's been great. And then yeah, even my sisters, I got two sisters as well. They're involved in it too. So kind of nice family metric that way. Yeah. So from kind of that point, like of having the family stuff, then like when I met Sarah, my wife, like it was kind of just at the beginning of starting to compete. So I really knew nothing about it. And again, it was like a Dorian Hamilton thing. Like I was chatting to him at the gym and kind of mentioned what I wanted to do. Classic Physique had just began. It was 2016. And his question was, do you want to do men's physique or do you want to do classic physique? Because at the time, like there was no option of doing open bodybuilding. I think it was like 190 pounds or something like that. So I always liked kind of the idea of like having full poses and going through displaying legs and stuff like that. Like my legs have always been kind of my strong point. So I chose classic physique being a little bit undersized, and then it's taken like literally since 2016 to now to, and I still have to work on it, but to fill out like my frame because I'm pretty tall. So getting kind of that extra weight over the years, and then being where I am now, it's definitely taken some time, but I'm glad that I chose that path versus men's physique.
Yeah. What is your actual height, Blake?
I'm just over 6 feet tall, so I'm 6.5 inch, and every inch you get an extra 10 pounds, right? So I think I remember like Chris, he was like right on the edge of, I think he's about the same height as me, but there's always like techniques of trying to like gain that extra, like, because if you can gain a half an inch, you can jump into the next category. Like 10 pounds can make all the difference in the world for classic physique. So I'm not at the point where I need to get on a torture machine to stretch me out yet, but I'll
Right.
hopefully be there pretty soon.
Okay, now before we get too deep into competing and all that, just
Mhm.
taking like a step back to your childhood, did you
Yeah.
have, because of your kind of like, it sounds like your dad was pretty health focused or definitely into some sort of working out and things like
hmm
that. You had the home gym, you said.
hmm
So was like hockey, was sports, was that kind of
hmm
like a big part of shaping your childhood then?
So I'm like the only white guy in Canada that like can't skate for shit. Like I literally like my ankles break immediately like, when I go on the ice. It's so funny because like all my buddies played growing up, and I think this is one of those things. Like my dad didn't play either, so I actually played a lot of American football and baseball, and actually kind of it stemmed a little bit from that because when I was in my senior year for football, I broke my collarbone. And that was obviously, I was getting into the gym then. I was pretty kind of devastated about it, but I realized I wasn't as upset about not being able to play football. I was more upset about not being able to work out. So once I kind of had rehab that, I knew I had no future in football, especially around here. So the gym became the focus and started, working full time, but then still having like the gym was my huge kind of hobby that still is today, obviously.
Right. Yeah. Now, once you were kind of getting towards the end of high school, did you kind of have a focus to go, off to university? Where was your mind at, like, kind of when you were getting towards the end of high school, like in terms of like, what you wanted to be when you grew up? I mean, was the fitness thing such a big part, in high school that you were kind of like, I'm going to graduate, I'm going to pursue this, or was there some other thoughts in your mind once you were getting at the end of high school?
Honestly, no, I had no idea that the fitness thing would be as big as it has kind of, become at this point. Like at that point, I was super scrawny, honestly. Like I grew up a skinny kid. People would call me skinny all the time, blah, 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 blah. But I was, I think, probably 165 pounds maybe coming out of high school. So I definitely wasn't one of those like, genetic monsters that you hear stories about, like benching 4 plates in high school. There was none of that going on. I was definitely working out. I was in good shape, but I was nowhere near being like competitive for the stage or anything like that. So aspiring to, go into the fitness realm definitely wasn't a thing at that time, but I still, I like the lifestyle. And then I like the idea of like, being in good shape and trying to add muscle, but I didn't think it would come to this. In terms of like what I wanted to do professionally, my dad owned a biotech business. So I went off to school for a little while and then quickly kind of got tired of that lifestyle too. It was like, it just wasn't for me. That was when I went to, the same town that Regan is in. So I was working out there, but also, doing some studying in that. And then it's about a year and a half into that. I was kind of like, all right, I'm tired of like going out on a Tuesday night for dollar beers. Like, this is really what I want to do. So I gave my dad a quick call, and he was always the one. He was telling me, he's like, don't even go. He didn't want me to go to school, right? He wanted me to start working right away. So it was something that he was, happy about, that I was going to come work for the family business. So ended up kind of fast forwarding. I worked there for about a decade, like just under 10 years, so 9.5 years. And then he sold the business, and I transitioned out, and I actually went into the supplement space for a little while before transitioning out of that as well. So all kind of corporate style work, sales, marketing. I even spent some time in accounting. Like I've kind of gone full spectrum of everything. That's kind of what happens when you work for a family business. You end up, doing everything. So it was a really, really good kind of learning experience for me from a business standpoint. And then I was able to kind of, nice part about working for my dad and having the fitness thing too, is that he was super like, you got to eat a meal, you can have a meal. Like I was able to stay on track with like, we got to eat like 6 times a day. So I'm eating like 3 times at work. It's not really something you can do at a lot of places. So I was pretty thankful, grateful for being able to do that. And then once I transitioned out of there, I was into supplements. So obviously when you're in the supplement space, people understand the lifestyle there too, right? So good, like bodybuilding friendly jobs, but also very like demanding and stressful too. So now I've got a little bit different situation going on with my like coaching and that, and I love it. Like I'm at home and I'm cortisol levels are a lot lower, and I'm doing something that I actually really love. So
For sure.
it's been a great transition.
Now, I want to kind of draw from you, Blake, before we kind of get into all things bodybuilding and competing and coaching and all that. That's kind of like, the enjoyment for me with this podcast is that, behind the muscle, right? Like we see the IG posts, we see kind of all the highlights, we see the wins, we see the muscle and the physiques and all that. But what I love is kind of getting that backstory. So, you said you worked, with your dad, for your dad, for like 9.5 years, kind of in more of a corporate setting. And you said it was a great experience. You learned a lot. What is something from that corporate experience and the specific experience working in that family business? What are a couple, lessons or valuable tools that you gained through that 9.5 years?
You know what? I think a big one is just like general business understanding, because you can apply it to really anything in life. And everything kind of, I always related back to bodybuilding too. Like once you learn like how to kind of do these kinds of things, it just lays like your kind of your foundation for your life. Like the discipline comes from not only bodybuilding but also business. So like, when I was working my job, I was, out the door at the same time, back home at the same time, had a really good routine. But it was also like, you had to be on time for a meeting. You had to, get X, Y, and Z done for a specific deadline. And I think that gave me a lot of, good responsibility at my life, especially at a younger age. I think it was able to kind of allow me to mature, especially coming right out of school. Like I started working like corporate when I was actually 18 when I started. So, in an office filled with a lot of smart people. So I was able to be around a lot of people that have, I'm still learning from all the time and keep in touch with. And it also allows you to learn sort of how to network. I think networking would be the second biggest thing that I could take away from business. There's two sets of people, right? There's the people that think, you have to go to school for X amount of time. Once you get out of there, your path is kind of set. I had a unique scenario, obviously, where I was able to get into business because of my dad, but I've always been an experience first kind of person. And like through the bodybuilding thing, that's the same way. Like you can listen to a person talk all you want, but until you do it and you put the time in, you won't truly understand it, right? So that was the same for me with business as it is for bodybuilding. It was just a long kind of period of time of the, trial and error, learning different things that way. And to go back to the networking point, I think it's taught me like bodybuilding is a huge networking thing too, right? It's about, growing your social media and, being competitive, and there's a little bit of politics always involved in everything. And it's sometimes it helps to know certain people obviously in the industry, and then they can help you too, right? So I think if you can help someone, then you're being helped by somebody else. It's like kind of a nice cascade effect in terms of being a good person and helping other people out too.
100%, man. I love that last point there about the networking. I mean, I own a business, and obviously with the podcast, like, networking, if your mind and your heart are in the right place with networking and connecting with others, man, like it's unbelievable how you connect with people, and those people can open up so many doors for you. And then, like you said, kind of like, hey, it's not just about you networking, but hey, how can I serve you? How can I help you? And a lot of times those people are going to do the same right back. And that's huge, man, in life and business. So very valuable point and lesson there. I appreciate you touching on that, Blake. Now let's kind of dive into bodybuilding and training and all the things, fitness. So, you're doing the corporate thing, you're doing your training. When, at what age did you start competing? And then why don't you talk about that first competition? And then why didn't you unpack, your competition history? Maybe just touch on some of those bigger shows, national shows. And then we'll get to the point where you earned your IFBB Pro card earlier this year. And then we'll kind of just go from there.
Yeah, so I'll take it back to the first one. It was a regional show, and this was in 2016. So it was the first year that Classic Physique, became a division. And it's funny because I tell everyone like that show, man, it was the hardest one out of every show that I've done. Like it nearly killed me. And it's funny because like you think like the bigger you get, the more tissue you have, like, the harder it is to hang on to. I just thought that like, because it was the first one, I had no idea sort of what to expect going into a prep. Like I didn't even really have friends that, I obviously saw these guys at the gym and stuff, but they weren't my friends. Like my friends all, none of them are into bodybuilding. So I've got a really great group of friends from high school. and they have totally different lifestyles from me. And so I sort of went down this path a little bit blind. And it was, man, it was eye-opening. Like I learned so much about myself, and trying to balance multiple things. So like when I started, it was like my prep started in kind of 2015 because I needed to add size. So it was like an off season, but I treated it like a prep, and that was with Dorian was my first coach. And once I got on the program, everything was great, going well, it was growing X, Y, and Z. And then once I started dieting, like it was just way harder than I expected it to ever be. I think like when you get close to the end, like I had a hard time even like taking the trash out to the curb and stuff like that. I was just like zapped. My energy was non-existent. So it was like learning how to kind of operate with like zero energy and like zero emotional wherewithal. Like with Sarah, we had not been together too long. Like I think maybe like a year or so. Like we've been together for a long time now, right? Couple of years together. She's yelling at me in the background. I'm like, I know I'm gonna get shit for this one. So yeah, what like she knew that I was at the gym all the time and stuff, but I think like I started acting differently, right? Like you just like you're not yourself, I guess, at the end. And that was a big kind of learning experience for both of us. So I was trying to kind of balance like, I really like this girl. I don't want to mess this up. Like I have a job. I have, demanding responsibilities at my office job. I don't want to mess that up because right now bodybuilding is like a fun hobby. It's definitely not going to be paying the bills. So I had all sorts of things where I was just like trying to be good at all of them. And it was like, holy crap, man, I was falling apart sort of kind of thing. But I realized then that once I had gotten through that and I got on stage, and it's funny because things have changed so much even in the past few years in competitive kind of realm. Like the regional show I did, there was 17 guys in my class. Whenever I go to shows now, there's maybe like 4 or 5, maybe 6 around here. There was 17 guys, and I was first call out, dead center, and like I just knew then I was like, this is something I might be good at, and also like it's super rewarding, right? Because when you go through 4 or 5 months and then get on stage and kind of get over that hump, then I realized that like, okay, like all that suffering and stuff, it really sort of paid off. So after that first one, I went to Provincials. Provincials doesn't exist anymore, but that's kind of the next level around here back then. And I won my class there. I didn't get the overall. Then I went straight into nationals, and then I literally did let's see here, I think it was 7 pro qualifying events, and I finished first in 6 of them. So I was in the overall like literally 6 times, but I didn't win. So it was just like, show after show, I dragged everybody all over the place because I was like, guys, I'm so close. Like, I'm going to get this pro card. This was years ago. So we actually went to the Bahamas. I dragged some family and friends down there. I think I ended up finishing 3rd at that one. It was not great. And then 2 weeks later, we actually took a flight to Iceland. So Iceland had their first like pro qualifying event, and I'm being dumb, right? I'm like, there's nobody in Iceland that friggin' works out. Like I'm gonna go there and I'm gonna clean up. But there was a lot of good guys that came over from like the European side, and another huge class. There was 17 guys, and I ended up winning that class, and then narrowly losing in the overall to someone. This was 2017, 2018. So then after that, I was like, all right, you know what? Like, I gotta take a little bit of a break and add some size. And it wasn't really honestly until like COVID came around where I was like, now I'm forced to take this like extended off season. Like I can't compete. There's no shows being run. So I literally like just, packed on an extra like 15 pounds of stage weight. And then now coming back and doing this most recent show, I was able to step on stage. I think it was 12 pounds heavier than the last time that I stood on stage. And obviously 12 pounds changes everything. And yeah, I was able to get my pro card at the Canadian Nationals, which I am really proud of because that's the fourth time I've done that show. And in Canada, there's, especially this year, there's only one pro card given to a classic physique person all year. So that is pretty cool. I had original thoughts of doing the North Americans because they give them to like the top two per class. And I kind of thought like, not that it's an easy way out because it is a stacked show. Like there's a lot of good talent down there. But then, as it got closer and stuff, I'm just like, I think I had to be a little bit more confident to think like, let's just do Toronto and like and win that show because I've been trying to get that one for a long time. So yeah, that's kind of takes you from the first one all the way up to this was just a few weeks ago. It happened. So still kind of riding that big high right now.
So I want you to, I know it's probably still a little bit surreal for you, Blake, but I mean, just grinding for 4, 5, 6 years, however long it's been, in pursuit of that IFBB pro card, like, just talk about the day, in terms of when you won it at Canadian Nationals, Mr. Canada Classic Physique, like now that it has been a couple weeks, talk about the actual day when you actually knew that you received and earned your pro card. Just talk about your thoughts at that point. And now that you've had a little time pass, where are you kind of at? And I know you just said like it's still kind of hard to believe, but just as you're starting to process, just kind of like, as things are starting to sink in, touch on that a little bit. So talk about the day, the experience of actually earning your pro card, winning, the overall, all that stuff, and then kind of where your mind's at right now. And then transition into what are your future plans going forward to step on an IFBB pro stage.
Yeah, for sure. So the day, it was definitely different than previous shows in terms of like, I felt a ton of pressure because it was really the first one where I think like everyone expected me to win. So like, people were saying like, you're going to win your pro card or like it's 100% thing. It's a guarantee. And I'm like, I've been here so many times where I haven't gotten a pro card and people said like, every show, everyone's like, oh, you're going to get it. But, to me, I'm like, I'm confident in what I'm bringing all the time, but it's a judgmental sport, obviously, as everyone knows. And there's people that just show up, like you can't stop someone from showing up and looking better than you that day. So, I knew in my mind, like there was no guarantee. Like it's not like you step on stage and they hand you an award, right? So I think for me, like I watched Ian kind of go through this, and he's obviously at a way different level. But when he was doing, I think was it Tampa with Hunter. It was the same thing. Like everyone was like, "Oh, you're gonna dominate and win and stuff," and that kind of takes a little bit of the fun out of it, I think. So a big portion kind of leading up to it, like, and I want to say maybe the last week, like I started just honestly being anxious about it and just wanting to kind of have it done. But then the day, like it's almost routine now because I've done enough shows where I have the same routine every time. Like basically my wife and we basically lock ourselves down into our hotel room and just relax and try and put my feet up and, just watch some Netflix or something and like not really give into too much of like, attention for social media or like walking around and chatting with people. Like, I think, some to each their own, like a lot of these shows, people are like, bouncing around, chit chatting and stuff like that. For me, I'm just like, I need to just kind of focus and just try and relax as much as possible, because if I don't, then you get in your own head pretty quick. And like when you're at the show, like a lot of times people are backstage early and it's just like a really like stressful environment back there. Like people are pumping up, there's all these like volunteer people yelling like get backstage, get in line, do this and that, and it's just so much stress. So I try and avoid getting back there too early and just try not to rush the process. I think people follow people, right? So when you're back there, sometimes people are pumping up like an hour before they're on and stuff, and it's just a huge mistake. So I learned that from Dorian, like the first show I did. he was my coach, and I was backstage, and I'm like texting, I'm like, where the hell are you, man? Like what are you doing? Like the guys are all pumping up and stuff. And he just sent me a message being like, dude, just relax, like put your pants back on, lay down, put your feet up, kind of do this and that. So yeah, my big takeaway from that was just try and be almost like monk level, like kind of zen going into it. So I just basically put my headphones on, chill as much as I can. And then once I was pumping up backstage, that's when, that adrenaline starts to flow. And, that's literally by the time I'm pumping up, I'm like 3 minutes to getting on stage, because there's so much posing. And like, if you have your carbs and your sodium and your water still in, like, it's not a fear of getting pumped up. Like I'll hit like a front double or a back double and I'll feel like pumped, you know what I mean? So the experience was great. Obviously, when I got out on stage, being in the taller class, I go last. So there was it was a really stacked class. And they posed us like for, I think it was like 5.5 minutes, which doesn't sound like a lot of time, but we were just going in circles and quarter turns and, hitting mandatories. And by the time I got off stage, I was zapped after my class. I'm like, holy shit, I should have posed more, like got my cardio better or whatever. But right after that, then because of I think it's because of COVID, they do the finals right away. So I'm like, holy crap, like I got to get my shit together here, because I got to go do my, my routine. So I went out and did my little routine thing. And then I came back out, and then it's right into the overall. So I was like thinking on stage when I was out there for the overall, I'm like just sucking wind. I'm like trying to catch my breath in that. But I'm like thinking in the back of my head, I'm like, this is it. You know what I mean? Like, this is the time when like you just got to pull it out and pose as hard as you can. So started posing on stage with those guys, and they moved me sort of into the middle area to compare me against one of the shorter guys. And that was at that point I felt pretty good about my chances of getting the overall. And then they moved us back, obviously called the number and stuff. And I was pretty big relief from pressure that way too, but also like just such a satisfying feeling getting it there. And then it was nice because the people handing the awards, like one of them was Antoine, who trains at Pure Muscle and Fitness. So he was there. He handed me the award. I know him obviously pretty well. And then also Dorian's wife, Rachel, was up there too. So it was kind of like a home kind of feel, I guess, with like all the people around. Like I've been doing this long enough at the amateur level where like I know everybody in the area. So it was like, to get it done, I had a ton of people, super excited and that for me, which was really nice, obviously. And then, it was just about kind of getting out of there after, because it can get crazy. And like, we always have like a nice dinner, my wife and I. So obviously food becomes like the number one thing, right? Like, as much as I don't want it to be, food is so big. So after the show, I'm like, all right, like we got to go get a burger or something like that. But yeah, the day itself was exceptional. Yeah, it was fun. And then to bring it up to this point, it definitely is surreal. Like, I don't know if it's fully sunken in yet or not. I changed my Instagram handle. That's probably about it. That's changed in my life. From like Patrick Tours, my coach. So he was saying like basically, kick back, relax, have a couple good days of eating or whatever, and then we'll figure out kind of what we want to do next. And I just told him, I said, my wife and I were having a baby next year, so I was like, I'm not going to compete next year. It's a total write-off. So I don't know if I would have chosen to do a show this year if like this wasn't the circumstances, but because of this, I'm like, I'd like to do the Toronto Pro, which at that time was 11 weeks. It's now, I guess, 9 weeks out now. So he basically said, from 11 weeks to 8 weeks, I'm having all high days. So like the food is pretty substantial. And, I've been enjoying myself with like I haven't done as much cardio and had some good meals and that. But then next week it'll be right back to, full prep essentially. and then dialing it in for the pro debut.
Awesome, dude. No, I didn't know that you were going to be competing still this year. So that's cool. Now you brought up a few things as you were just unpacking that we're going to get to. Like I again, just on your Instagram, doing a little digging in before we jumped on the podcast. I saw that you guys are having a baby in February, so we're going to touch on that. But kind of going back to just kind of the pressure. I want to talk about that because Ian has been pretty forthcoming, which I think it's refreshing. It's really cool with kind of just some of his struggles after or at Tampa, post Tampa, and then on one of the recent podcasts I was listening to, he talked about just taking some actual anxiety medication and having all these different pros on the podcast. This anxiety, pressure stuff has been coming up quite a bit on my podcast. So maybe not just necessarily the pressure leading up to the Canadian Nationals, but just any time that you feel pressure in terms of like sport, in terms of competing, in terms of bodybuilding, how do you kind of deal with that? How do you work through that? Because I feel like that's something that's really been coming up a lot just in society, more generally speaking, kind of like the anxiety and kind of some of the mental struggles. I struggle with anxiety myself. So how do you, Blake, just in terms of bodybuilding more specifically and competing, how do you deal with that pressure? Because even C-Bum says pressure is a privilege, right? That's kind of one of his slogans. So how do you work through that stuff?
No, and I see it from both sides. Like it can definitely be a detriment, and it can, it affects a lot of people, and in a way that it can be very difficult, right? But then, on the other side, like it is a privilege because it means, people are talking about you, and you're doing something that's maybe different than others are. So for me, like I have always been pretty good at managing it. Like I think it's not as much like anxiety as it is like anticipation. So, you're always counting the weeks down. It's like, I'm 7 weeks out now. I'm 6 weeks out now. I'm 5 weeks out now. And then I do a pretty good job, but I think obviously if you're doing this perfectly, it's like living in the moment, like being able to not forward think and to be planning next week. And I try and tell my clients this all the time. Like they're like, well, what's the program next week? I'm like, you'll know that when we get to next week, like it's this week still. So like, let's just relax on that. But when I think once you get to like, for me anyway, when I'm like a week out, then it's like every day, right? Like, it's like, okay, now we're 6 days out, we're 5 days out. It's just like anticipation for like one quick moment. And I honestly, other than like, like an Olympic athlete or something that's doing like 100-meter sprint, like there's really no other sport where it's like this amount of work for like such a short period of time. So I just think that like, it's a funny example, but like when you're in the car and you got to take a piss, you got to pee 20 times more when you get to the bathroom. You know what I mean? So it's like that last little portion becomes, it can consume, everything kind of going on in your life. And bodybuilding being a selfish kind of thing already, like once you get closer, it's everything you think about day in and day out. And it can be hard on more than just being like, anxious. It can be hard on relationships with, your work and all those things, right? Because it's so mind consuming that a lot of other things do take a back seat. And I think that you just got to kind of realize that when you are that close, like it's normal to feel, anxious or have those kinds of feelings. I don't know if there's really any way of ridding yourself completely of them, but yeah, I mean, for me, like it hasn't been like a detriment in terms of like, I've seen like even at the last Olympics that one girl in the gymnastics, like she wasn't even able to compete, right? So you can see how it can go, so far where it does take away from what you're trying to achieve. And it's obviously, that's very sad when it gets to that point. But yeah, it's just, I'm not perfect at it. That's for sure. I think every show I do, I get a little bit better, but it's just, it's also a period of time. So if you're 8 weeks out and you're thinking like every day, then that adds up. But I think if you can hold back until the last few days of of feeling that way, then that's really the best. But everybody's different, right? And I know what it's like, but it doesn't hold me back from what I'm trying to do.
Perfect, man. Perfect. Now, I did see you tag Patrick Tour in one of your recent posts, so I was assuming that he is your current coach. You said Dorian was your first coach. Were there any other coaches in between Dorian and Patrick or not?
No, and with Dorian, yeah, it was because I knew him, right? Like I met him at the gym, and he was competing at the time and looked like a cartoon character, and I'm like, this guy's probably the right guy to to approach if I want to get serious about this. So I had asked him at the gym, and it's funny because he said, "No, man, like my roster is full." He's like, "I have a friend, Fuad," and I didn't know bodybuilding that well back then. So I was like, "Okay." Like then I looked up this guy. I'm like, "Holy crap!" Like this guy is crazy too, right? So I was like thinking in my head, I'm like, "Well, I don't know," because at that point in time, online coaching, it wasn't quite as established. So I was like, I don't know Fuad, so I don't really want to use him. So I told Dorian, I'm like, I'll probably pass on the Fuad thing, but if anything opens up, let me know, kind of thing. And then he came back, I think it was a couple weeks later, and said, I'd like to take you on. And then that was 2015, and I worked with him up until basically pre-COVID kind of time. And the reason that we stopped working together was he was very focused, obviously, on the supplement business. And also, like, he had athletes that he coached that were a part of the supplement business. And myself at the time, I was working for a different supplement company, in this area too. So it wasn't really like a conflict of interest, so to speak, but it just like didn't really align as well with, what was going on. He wanted to focus on like his own athletes and everything. And I said, listen, I completely understand. And I just said, I've been thinking like if I didn't train with you, like I would like to, see what kind of Patrick's methods are. And he said that he said that I love what Patrick does, and he's like, it's actually very similar to my approach, and this and that. So he gave me kind of the full, confidence to go that route. And then when I reached out to Patrick, he was great. He just said, yeah, no, let's do this. And I was actually like 14 weeks out from a show that got canceled because of COVID. So we, started working together for that one, and then unfortunately got canceled. But then the first show that I ever did essentially was this pro qualifier with Pat, and it was like a one and done with him. So it was a pretty good experience. And no, he's phenomenal. Like I tell people all the time, like, and you hear it from some of the top pros too. I kind of was a little bit nervous getting into it with him because I thought, okay, like he's got, James and he's got Ian, like how much is he going to give a shit about me, right? But at the end of the day, like I think most coaches, you go through like an off season or something, you may hear from them like once a week or whatever, right? And that's fine. But like when it push comes to shove and you're like a couple weeks out and things are changing all the time, like he's on it. He's like, super, super detailed and well oriented. And the other thing I like to add in as like a caveat with him is there's levels of coaches, obviously, right? Like there's, your local gym coach who you meet and he helps you out. And then there's X, Y, and Z coaches that, are helping out a certain amount of people. And then there's the gurus. So there's like, the Acetos and the Matt Jansons and even the Dorians and those top level guys that people, I guess, aspire to work with. I think Patrick is one of those where if I started working with him in 2015, like it wouldn't have worked because his programs are so detailed. Like if I was younger and I had just started, I'm like, I don't know if I'd be able to follow this thing properly, right? But now I've been doing this for a long enough time that like it suits my lifestyle, but it's it's detailed and it's like to the gram kind of thing, and he expects you to be following it obviously 100%, and it works exceptionally well. But if you're just starting out, it might not be the right program for you, right? But as higher level and then that as you go through it, he's an awesome coach and a great guy too.
Excellent, man. One thing I do want to ask you about Patrick before we move on.
Mhm.
Because I compete in bodybuilding, and the coach that I've had in the past is somebody he's 3 hours away from me, but I can jump in my vehicle, drive, and have him look
Mhm.
at me. And I've always kind of felt like, man, if I'm going to hire somebody, I want them to be able to have eyes on me, because
Sure.
I truly believe that. I mean, seeing somebody through a Zoom call, or just even if it's a high resolution photo, it's just different than seeing somebody in person. And that's kind
Mhm.
of what you said earlier when you were talking about, when Dorian's like, hey, I don't have, the roster spot for you right now. Go to Fuai, and you're like, man, I don't really know him. I'm not going to probably be able to see him much. So
Mhm.
how was that for you, the transition going from Dorian, having him see you constantly all the time, to working with Patrick, who I'm assuming you guys have probably never met in person, right? It's just the same way
Yeah.
with him and Ian. It's all through online. So how has that transition worked for you? Obviously, it's worked well, but I'm sure there was a little bit of hesitancy in the beginning working with Patrick because of, hey, I'm not going to get to see him in person. He's not going to get to see me. So talk about
Yeah.
that. And then maybe some of those guys that are at that national level and they're thinking about switching coaches or looking into coaches, maybe just speak to them about, hey, like, this is why it can work, working with a coach remotely. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a great question. So, Patrick does a really good job, I think, of well, he's in a different time zone too, right? Like he's in Switzerland, and I think he goes back and forth to Italy all the time. So it actually works out quite well because like I'm a early morning guy. Like I'm literally sending this guy updates like 5:30, 6 a.m. because I like to do my stuff and then focus on the clients. So he gets an update from me at 5:30 and it's like 11:30 a.m. his time, right? So he's ready to roll. He's on the update right away. In terms of like seeing someone, I think that that is very important, especially if you haven't worked with someone in the past and they can have all the craziest lighting in the world and they look bone dry, and then all of a sudden you see them, you're like, okay, like we got to push the diet a little bit harder. But I think again, he's at the point where a lot of the people he's working with, I think, like, I mean, Ian's a coach too. I'm sure James has helped a lot of people out as well, but he actually leans on you as an athlete to tell him, like, he goes, I think you look great here and I think things are trending in the right direction, but he goes, what do you think? And I really like that about him because when you've been doing this long enough, like what kind of shape you're capable of getting into, or maybe that line was deeper, the year before and stuff. So at the end, it's very like follow like that, but there are a lot of opportunities for you to say, hey, listen, like I'm 6 weeks out now. I don't think I'm quite tight enough, and he'll take that feedback and he will say, okay, you know what, like let's remove carbs here, let's add a little bit of cardio in. So it's not like a dictatorship, I guess. It's more of like a partnership, which is pretty cool with him. So I think that also bodes more well for like people who have been doing this for a little while, because yeah, anybody who's been doing this for more than a few shows knows their own body as well. So it's like he'll tell you what he thinks, but then he wants your feedback as well of, do you think this is working? When I drop carbs here, like how did your performance at the gym, fluctuate, and those kinds of questions. So that's been really helpful. And then obviously like my wife, like she sees me every day too. And it was funny because back when I was with Dorian, she used to message Dorian and be like, I don't think Blake's lean enough like for this show. And then I would get a message from Dorian like 20 minutes later, be like, hey, what are you doing? Be like, I don't know, I'm watching TV. He's like, you jump on the bike for 20 minutes. I just saw Sarah at the grocery store or something. Like, oh my God, here we go. Right. But this time, like, I mean, you become like obviously see yourself every day, right? But there's other people in your circle, I think, that have a look at you too. And that can be a detriment if you listen to too many people. I tell clients this all the time, like there's a million ways to get lean, right? But if you follow those million ways, you're going to go a million ways, right? So you got to have that one kind of voice. but then also be able to be open to feedback too, right? Like all these people around you, if they're good people, they have your best interests at mind, and you know, it can help if they tell you like they see something that might be off or whatever. But from Patrick's side, like everything that he told me to do, it worked. And like even the peaking process, like it was a little bit different than maybe working with Dorian, but everything that like, you know, he would add in, I would look at myself and like, okay, shit, like this is really working. And then when we had a phone call after, he said that was probably the best you could have looked on stage. So really happy with the whole experience with him for sure. And I recommend anybody that's looking to get a coach, if you've been doing this for, you know, a little bit of time, then just be consistent with where your pictures are, with videos you're sending and that kind of thing. And it can be done from anywhere in the world for sure.
Very well put, man. I appreciate you touched on that, Blake. Now, I want to tie this into your own coaching. You have BioBuilder, and why don't you just talk about BioBuilder, talk about your own coaching, kind of when did you start? And, you know, if anybody's listening to this and they want to connect with you in terms of coaching, feel free to share any of that information as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been coaching for pretty much as long as I've been competing. It really started with like helping a few friends out, and just like a couple of buddies wanted to get in shape. They didn't want to compete or anything like that, but I said, listen, I'll help you out. I want the experience. And then I went back and I got the accreditation through the ISSA. So I was able to, you know, coach in person. I did a little bit of personal training at the gym. Realized that wasn't really for me. And then I was more focused on like the nutritional kind of, you know, side of things. So basically just kind of year over year, it started progressing more and more. And I was always taking on clients while I was working. So it was like, you know, I had my Monday to Friday job and then I dedicated the weekend to clients. Now it's a lot different, and it's a lot greater too, because I have the flexibility of having like different people check in on different days. And like, it really is my true focus. And at first it kind of started as a way where I could stay involved with people competing year round, because like I love it so much. At the beginning, like, you know, you would compete maybe a couple times a year, but now I've almost got, you know, someone competing every week or every month. And it's exciting because I get to live that, like, you know, process with them and kind of assist that way. So it's just been something that's, you know, started off as something that like I was in interest of, to really becoming like my full-time job now. So it's been a really, really great progression that way. And when I was obviously in the corporate, I could only take on so many people and help so many people out. But then once I transitioned out of that, and especially with this whole pro card thing and everything, and a lot of like attention through social media as of late, like I've been having a lot of people reaching out and a lot of success that way. And yeah, it's just a huge passion of mine. My wife actually does it as well too. So she helps out like the female clientele. And then I just specifically stick to the men. So you know, she's great with like the hormone stuff and all the different you know, mechanisms that way. And then I've, you know, become great at helping out the guys, whether it's lifestyle or competitively.
So if somebody's listening to this and they want to connect with you in terms of coaching specifically, where can they touch base with you, Blake?
The best, easiest way is just to send me a DM. Like I check all my DMs on Instagram. That's usually the way that the, you know, relationship starts. And then from there, I take it to a WhatsApp kind of platform where all the communication goes through with all my clients. But yeah, if you're looking to compete, if you're looking to drop some weight, hit me up. And yeah, happy to help.
Work with Mr. Canada, right?
That's right. Yeah, new marketing approach to that now. So it's great.
So I had this written down. Sometimes we get to it, sometimes it comes up on the podcast, sometimes it doesn't. But with you
Sure.
being a younger guy, being you know, Mr. Canada just very recently, and you've kind of already alluded to it or touched on it, like social media kind of blowing up. And then, you know, if somebody wants to connect with you, it's like, hey, go to my Instagram, right? That's how this podcast exists. It's because I send random DMs to people on Instagram. So, but just after the receiving and earning the IFBB Pro card, talking about Instagram and just kind of social media blowing up, how do you obviously you utilize social media, you utilize Instagram for business, but how do you kind of like mentally and personally just like work through social media? Because it can really suck you in, man. And it
Oh
can
yeah.
be very addictive, and it can just really consume your life. So talk about maybe some boundaries. How do you now utilize it, obviously professionally, but then also how do you balance that with using it personally? Just touch on that a little bit. I'm curious.
Yeah, definitely don't download TikTok. That's it's advice piece number one. But no, honestly, like everybody, I mean, I'm guilty of like just mindlessly scrolling Instagram, right? Like I think everybody is to a certain extent, but I just try and be a little bit more mindful of what I'm doing on social media in terms of like, am I getting value out of this versus like, am I putting just attention, into mindless stuff on there? Because obviously at the end of the day, like you want to represent yourself in a certain way and you want to share, content that might help other people with their goals and trying to figure out like to their training. But I get people asking me all the time, like, hey man, like how come you don't put out more training videos? And it's for me, it's because when I'm in there to train, like I'm in there early, first of all. And second of all, like it changes the way I train when a camera's around. Like when a camera's around, you got to talk to it, explain the set, this and that. And yeah, obviously you want to help people, but you also have to be, looking out for your own goals and making sure that it's not taking away from your own training. Because obviously back in the day, none of this existed, and those guys were just 100% focused. And even in between sets, like when things are getting serious and prep and stuff, like I'm thinking about the next set. I'm not trying to think about like, hey, can I get a better angle on like this camera or whatever. So I typically stay away from it when I'm in the gym and trying to get that done. And then when I'm outside of the gym, like I do like to share kind of like my day-to-day stuff. I think a lot of people they put so much into like curating content, like creating things specific for Instagram. I just kind of like to show what I'm doing because I think that like it's what I like to see too. Like, if you're eating a meal, just show what you're eating. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to be like this super complicated thing. But then with that being said, like I do have aspirations of like growing my social audience because like in this day and age, and you obviously know too, it's like that's such a big piece of the fitness industry and like life itself. Because if you have X amount of followers, it's X amount of people that might purchase a product from you, might take up your coaching, might listen to your podcast. So I know that, but then at the same time, like I'm not going to change, what I'm doing and who I am to try and, get more followers or something on Instagram. And like, not to throw like any shade at like Callum, like, but he was one of the persons that like, I really sat back and looked at kind of how he went about it. And like, he's massively successful, right? Like he has a huge following, but from when I was, when I'm looking at that, I'm like, I don't want that as much as I want to be like a good pro or like as much as I want to be good on stage. So like, if I'm going to take time out of my day to like, set things up and do these kinds of like kind of funny videos and stuff, it doesn't take me to where I want to go personally. So I just knew that sort of thing wasn't for me. But yeah, so social media, again, like it can be such a waste of your time, but it can also have huge rewards if you play your cards right with it, for sure.
Dude, I love that perspective, man. Like when I'm training, like that's my time, right? And it's like, dude, my phone, I leave my phone at my business. I go somewhere else, even though I own a gym. I don't train at my own gym. I leave my phone at my business at the gym. I go to another place and train. Dude, my phone's not even close to me. I don't care. Like, yes, I love social media and you can use it for good. You can use it for bad. You can whatever. But dude, like this is my time, and I'm not going to allow myself to be distracted. I don't care if I get more followers, if I put more content of me training, or dude, I don't care. Like I am who I am, and I'm not going to allow social media, something that didn't even exist when we were growing up, to change me, right? Like, yes, I'm going to use it. Yes, I enjoy it. I'm going to utilize it and try to grow it and all the things when it's that time of the day, right? But when it's my
Sure.
time, when I'm training, like, dude, I don't care, so I think we're kind of like very similar with that mindset. So
I
appreciate
think
that. Now,
I think Arnold put something out saying where like he's like enough of the Mickey Mouse stuff. Like when you have your phone out, like to all the new guys that are training. Like I think even like the younger generation, like they're glued to their phone, right? And it's like the set's more about the video than it is about like pushing yourself, past failure. So yeah, I think it's good advice, like from your perspective. Like even if you keep your phone away from you, like when you're thinking about it as like 100% kind of mentality, if you're like 80% into your set, 20% into the Instagram, yeah, your Instagram is going to grow 20%, but you're only getting 80% out of your workouts. So it's like, what's more important to you? If it's your workout, then, do your best to stay away from your phone and put 100% in, because you're not going to be progressing week after week if you're focused on your social media and the gym. That's for sure.
awesome, man. We're gonna head towards the finish line here. I want to be respectful of your time. I want to touch on a couple things. I've had, Antoine's been on the podcast. I've had Big Mike on the podcast. Dorian is going to come on the podcast after the Olympia. He said, let me just make it through Olympia week. And he's going to jump on. Had a lot of you Canadian guys that train. Jay Living Good on Instagram, up and comer. He's been on. The point that I'm trying to get at, a lot of these guys that train at Pure Muscle and Fitness, soon to have, one of the co-owners of Pure Muscle and Fitness, HD Muscle, on the podcast. It from everything I see, man, it looks like it's just an unbelievable environment, an unbelievable family. Just touch on that, being able to train at Pure Muscle and Fitness, being around all these other top pros. What's that like for you, Blake?
Oh man, it is honestly like a dream. And like people, like my wife and I were moving, and like literally our number one thing is like, how can we keep within proximity to the gym? Because I literally can't go anywhere else now. I haven't trained anywhere else since I started there. And I came from a classic like big box gym, as did everyone else in my area. And then when that place opened up, it was like, just another level. The equipment there is all so fantastic. It's all hand picked. Each individual piece, there's a reason why it's there, kind of thing. And they opened up like I don't know if you've seen it, but they have two sides of it now. So like the first side, I think it was like 8,000 square feet. It was amazing. I'm like, this gym literally couldn't get any better. And then Dorian opened like another 20,000 square feet or something on the other side. So it's like, I haven't even tried everything in that gym, and I've been training there for, since they opened. So it's like, there's something for everyone in there, whether you're bodybuilding or whether you just want to lose a bit of body fat. Like the machines and stuff are so smooth that, I found ways where like my shoulder used to bug me all the time, doing certain movements and that. And when you only have X amount of machines, you can only progress so far through them, right? But then now with Pure, like he's got an incline press. He's got 7 of them from like 7 different brands, right? So it's like, okay, like this one, I've kind of gotten everything I can out of it. Let me try this Prime one, or let me try this one. It's just like, it's amazing. I've never been in a better gym in my life. I'm super fortunate to have it in like, within 10-minute drive of my house. So it's pretty cool.
Have you had an opportunity to train with Big Mike yet or not?
No, you know what? I have not. So I get this question a lot, and it's not it's just he trains such a different style, and Patrick is he's very diligent on making sure that I'm sticking to the program that he gives me. But with that said, like I would love to try some of his techniques and that. I actually worked out with Dorian just about a week ago, and he had just trained with Ben Pekulski. So Ben took Dorian through like some movements with back and stuff. And I took some of that from what I learned even last week and added it to my training this week. And it's amazing. You can always learn something, right? So with like guys like Ben Pekulski or Big Mike, like you train with them once and you can take like 1 to 2 things for the rest of your life if you want to apply them to your own training and make a difference at really any level. So it's something I want to do, but I haven't gotten around to it yet.
Very cool. Just quickly touching on training, is progressive overload the style that you generally stick to with your training?
Um, at the beginning it was, yeah. Like I was always I always had like aspirations of hitting all the major lifts, I guess, like the squat, bench, dead and stuff, and like working my way through there. And then more recently, like with Patrick's programs, they are about strength, but they're more about intensity, honestly. So like he's got it, I would say for the average person, it's not a low volume kind of thing, but for like, pro bodybuilder, it would be looked at as more low volume, but each set is so intense that like when you get through your 8, maybe 10 working sets, like you are absolutely fried. So it's not because the weight is exceptional. It's just because, he has all these different intensifiers. His program's called SST, and like everything's like timed, there's certain drop sets and stuff. Nobody wants to train with me because I've got my stopwatch, on my phone out, and I'm kind of going through that whole thing. And some sets are like 5 or 6 minutes with his program, so it's pretty different and pretty cool. But I've found a lot of success with that style. So yeah, he's been a huge change, obviously, like from a coaching perspective, but the training has been, I think, a big difference maker for me too.
So two final questions here, Blake. Once you step on an IFBB pro stage, make that pro debut, and kind of continue to pursue that career, why don't you give me 2 to 3 guys that you are looking forward to standing on stage with on the pro level in the coming years?
That's a really good question too. Like, I think for the pro debut, because it's in Toronto, I know like Terrence has done it in the past, but he doesn't have to do it anymore, right? Because he does so well at the Olympia that he just qualifies anyway. So I don't know. Honestly, I have no idea who's going to do the Toronto, which I think is kind of cool too. If it's all Canadian people, then yeah, I'll know like a handful of them. But for me, like goal wise, like my 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 goal has changed. So it was at first it was, do well at a show, and then things started going good. I'm like, now it's to turn pro. Now that I've turned pro, I'm like, the next step is to get to the Olympia, right? Like that's kind of the natural trajectory of that. So I would love to see how I looked on stage next to any of the top guys. Like Logan would be a cool guy to stand beside. I think, he's a bit taller like me too. And I think some of his strengths are my weaknesses, and my strengths are his weaknesses. So I think that would be kind of cool. And then obviously, Chris would be someone that would be very cool to stand beside, but give me a year or two to add maybe another 10 pounds. Otherwise, I think I might embarrass myself at this point. But yeah, I think the top guys, obviously you want to aim to get into that kind of conversation. So yeah, Chris, Logan, any of those guys would be really cool.
Excellent, man. All right, the last thing I want you to just talk about. You brought up Sarah, and you're going to be having a child in February. Just talk about because obviously family is important, because on your Instagram, the first thing you've got in your bio is family first, right? I'm assuming you're referring to your immediate family, but just talk about family. Talk about your relationship with Sarah. You guys have been together for a long time, and talk about just, I'm assuming, the excitement that you guys have with your first child coming in next year. So just talk about family for a minute, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. So I think that this day and age, like relationships and stuff might be a little bit different, but I think with whatever you're doing, if you have like that proper support system behind you, it goes so far. And I always think like when I'm doing all these things in bodybuilding, like I don't think it'd be that fun, honestly, on my own. Like it's so much more fun to do like with these people around me supporting me and like living through the whole process. And I always say like Sarah like is essentially doing the prep right with me. You know what I mean? She sees the whole thing. So it's cool because when you get rewarded at a high level, it's like super exciting to share with that person. And then in terms of like just the value of like I think I've always kind of had like this instilled like set of morals that I work from a younger age, and it just sort of fits like, you know, fits my lifestyle of having like, you know, these people around me. And now that we're having a baby coming up, it's just like, you know, we're over the moon about that. And um, we also got married 2 weeks before the competition, so that wasn't like planned well with the date and stuff, but it ended up being like the most exceptional day, and a good kind of, you know, break from the prep and that, and then was, you know, coming into the show. But yeah, man, I think a lot of people, and it kind of goes back to the social media thing, can get like distracted easily, have other focuses, like when you're constantly like chasing like attention from, you know, the other sex, that can take away from your own goals and aspirations too. It's like a huge like biological thing that's set in you to, like, you know, find a partner. You know, that's what life is about. And you know, when you don't have that, it comes with a lot of distractions, comes with a lot of headaches. And I just think that, you know, I was able to at a kind of a young age to find like, you know, the right person for me. And it's been you know, best part of my life, you know, these last 8 years. So yeah, family's huge. We've always wanted to have a kid too, and we had a lot of difficulty with that. So you know, going through like all the in vitro stuff and going to the doctor and making sure that, like, you know, everything was working out. So when we got the news about that, it's just been like a crazy year of like, man, I've cried this much in my life this year, like of all the years combined. So it's all been really great stuff, which is cool. But you know, I'm ready for a vacation too at the same time. But yeah, with the baby thing is incredibly exciting, and that's why next year I have it like totally written off. And it's funny because I was telling Sarah, like, unless I win the Toronto Pro, like I'm like, you know, going to that mindset of like, then I have to do the Olympia next year, right? Like that's just like the hall pass of all hall passes. So hopefully I do compete next year and it's at the Olympia, but at the same rate, yeah, we're just, everything is focused on the family stuff, and we're moving from this house and we're doing a whole bunch of, you know, stuff is always going on in the background. So that's the nice thing about having the balance too. You know, you have like your life goals and then the bodybuilding goals. And if you just focus on bodybuilding, like that doesn't last forever, right? It has an expiration date on it. And you know, your family and stuff, that's got to be number one.
Excellent, man. It's, dude, it's a breath of fresh air to have somebody in your position and with the platform you have, Blake, just, you know, understand the importance of family. So that's cool, man. I appreciate you touching on that. If you have any final words that you kind of want to share with the listeners, we've kind of hit on a lot of different topics, very thorough. But if there's any final words, anything you want to share with the listeners, feel free to do that. And then once again, if you just want to share your Instagram or website, anything else, sponsors, anything that you want to shout out or put out there, why don't you share that as well?
Yeah, man. I'll just first off give you a quick shout out, man, because you've been an awesome host. Like really great questions, thought provoking. You know, a little bit different. I didn't know exactly, you know, the style was coming into. I listened to the one that you had with Antoine, and it was very cool too. So I love what you're doing, and yeah, if you can keep getting like, you know, these awesome guests on, you know, I'm fortunate to be a part of that, so that's cool. And maybe looking back, you could be the, you know, the next Joe Rogan of the bodybuilding world, and I'll say, hey, listen, oh yeah, I was on that podcast, right? So no, you did an awesome job. And then if you guys want to find me, easiest way to do that is Instagram. It's B Course Fit. It's all, you know, one thing. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't really have, you know, too much other stuff to shout out. The coaching we went over. So yeah, just thanks for having me on here, man.
And you're very welcome. And I appreciate the kind words, Blake. Listeners, thank you so very much for listening, watching. If you're tuning in through YouTube, just two quick things I would ask of you guys, if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Why is that important? The number one importance with subscribing to the YouTube channel is that I produce or put all of these podcasts out on YouTube first, and then I transition to all the other platforms. And I want to touch on that just really quick. I had somebody send me a DM, I think it was yesterday, asking where they could find the podcast outside of YouTube. I had a podcast for like 3 years called the 127 Fit Podcast, and I'm slowly but surely transitioning it into changing the name, changing the logo to Behind the Muscle. So we're kind of in that transition period. So if you're trying to find it on iTunes or other podcast platforms, you might want to type in and try 127 Fit, because I am putting all the Behind the Muscle podcast episodes on that platform. And then slowly but surely the name will change, the logo will change. But again, subscribe to YouTube because that's where everything is released first. And then the second favor I have for all of you viewers, listeners, supporters, take Blake's episode, very valuable, very rich in information and insights. Share it on all of your social media platforms. You guys have been doing a great job of that. Tag Blake, tag myself, so that we know that people are listening, people are enjoying, people are finding valuable information in these episodes of the podcast, especially specifically Blake's. And finally, I will leave all of you with this. Remember, behind the muscle, there's always a story. We'll catch you guys later.